What?
Let me find out if they want to start. They're checking to
Yeah,
see.
yeah, let's go. I'll do some.
Philosophy's away. Let me check.
I used to run this stuff. You ready to roll?
The Subcommittee on Defense will come to order. This morning, the subcommittee will hold a hearing on the National Guard and Reserve components. Today's hearing will consist of two panels. During panel one, we'll discuss topics related to the Army and Air National Guard and Guard joint initiatives. Our witnesses for panel one is General Joe Lengel, the Chief of the National Guard Bureau and member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Welcome to the subcommittee. We appreciate your being here today to share the status of the Army and Air Guard and to allow members to gain knowledge from your expertise about this area. I continue to reiterate, as chairwoman of the subcommittee, that's vital to the members of the committee that we hear from our military leadership in order to make decisions regarding funding and the future direction for our national defense. Additionally, General Lengel, the committee wishes to recognize the sacrifice of two officers and two enlisted Air Guardsmen who died on March 15th when their helicopter crashed in western Iraq. Also, a regular Air Force officer and two Air Force reservists died in that crash. Our deepest sympathies to the families of the victims. There's a lot to cover today with two panels, but I wish to highlight that the Guard continues to be deployed around the world, and the most recent national news related to Guard deployments is the President's recent announcement to use Guard troops to defend the border between the United States and Mexico. The committee has many questions, and I hope we're able to address all of those today. But first, I'd like to call on the ranking member.
Well, first thing, thank you for being here. I've been taught years ago that if you're ahead, be quiet and move on. So I defer back to the chairwoman. And by the way, I will be leaving here soon because we have the last 2 days we've been having our defense hearings 3 in a row. So after my question, I'll probably be moving on. So I hope there's some Democrat that shows up.
The slight attendance has nothing to do with your appearance and the importance of the issues. It's the people on this subcommittee are on usually three subcommittees total, and they're very experienced, and so they will try to be here, and then their appointments and their questions are important in another committee too. So, Ms. General Lengel, would you like to make opening remarks, and then we'll move on to questions? If so, please proceed.
Chairwoman Granger and Ranking Member, thank you very much for having me here today. Distinguished members of the subcommittee, it is a pleasure for me to be here today. At this time, I'd submit my full written statement for the record. The National Guard consists of 343,000 citizen soldiers of the Army National Guard and 106,000 airmen of the Air National Guard. They represent the finest National Guard in our 381-year history, and I'm honored to represent them along with the families, communities, and employers who support them. In the National Defense Strategy, the Secretary outlined the priorities for our military to deter war and protect the security of our nation. In supporting the National Defense Strategy, my focus remains on our three primary mission sets: the warfight, defending and securing the homeland, and building enduring partnerships. The Guard is tremendously appreciative for this committee's support in enabling us to accomplish these missions. On any given day, approximately 20,000 men and women of the Army and Air National Guard work seamlessly as part of the joint force in protecting our nation's interests on every continent. With approximately 850,000 deployments since 9/11, Guard soldiers and airmen conduct complex operations around the globe, supporting commanders in every geographic combatant command. Your continued support allows us to leverage our years of combat experience to help confront current and future security challenges. In the homeland, your investment supports, on average, about 8,000 Guard soldiers and airmen every day conducting domestic and homeland security and defense operations. As you know, the Department of Defense is assigning our Guardsmen, under the command authority of their state governors, the mission of supporting the Department of Homeland Security with its border security mission. Your Air National Guard fighter wings are protecting our nation's skies in 15 of 16 aerospace control alert sites, including the skies over the Capitol today. The Guard has over 60% of the Department of Defense chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear response forces that are strategically positioned throughout the United States. Our cyber force will grow to 59 units across 38 states by fiscal year 19, in addition to the existing 54 Army National Guard defensive cyber operations elements. Soldiers and airmen in our counter-drug program, in coordination with law enforcement agencies and other partners, detect, interdict, disrupt, and curtail drug trafficking across our nation. And Army National Guard ballistic missile defense battalions defend the nation against intercontinental ballistic missiles as we speak. On top of all this, the National Guard stands ready to respond to emergencies such as hurricanes, wildfires, flooding, as well as assist law enforcement during times of civil unrest. Missions the National Guard performs with little or no notice. This past year, over 45,000 men and women of the National Guard responded to Hurricanes Irma, Harvey, and Maria, while simultaneously supporting wildland firefights across the numerous states. The National Guard has called 255 times and served more than 1.8 million man days responding to the homeland emergencies in fiscal year 17. Our presence in our communities around the nation uniquely postures us to respond when our communities need us. The same investment that enables the National Guard's success in the warfight and homeland operations also helps build enduring partnerships with international, federal, state, and local partners. The National Guard, through the State Partnership Program, currently partners with 79 nations. This low-cost, high-return program builds enduring partnerships based on mutual trust and generates contributions to coalition efforts around the world. On the federal, state, and local level, our deep partnerships with the National Guard unique authorities ensure a speedy response with unity of effort during times of domestic crisis. Our nation is currently facing ever-evolving security challenges. I'm thankful for this committee's recognition and support of your National Guard's role both in the homeland and abroad. For instance, this committee's support of the National Guard and Reserve Equipment Account allows our force to improve its ability to perform across the broad spectrum of contingencies here at home and overseas. Today's operational National Guard requires concurrent and balanced modernization and recapitalization with our active components. This committee's commitment to modernization and recapitalization on platforms such as F-35s and KC-46s and C-130Js, Blackhawks, and Humvees ensures that the National Guard is a seamless, interoperable, total force partner supporting the national defense strategy. Finally, for programs such as the State Partnership Program and Counter-Drug Program, allow National Guard to leverage its unique attributes to strengthen relationships overseas and aid domestic law enforcement and counter illegal drugs. Again, I am honored to be here representing the men and women of the National Guard and the families who support them. Thank you very much for the continued support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. I want to make members aware, of course, that we'll be using a timer, and each member will have, we're going to start off with 5 minutes. We may have to go down to a smaller number because we have 2 panels. It sort of depends on how many people come in. You'll have a yellow light on the timer for the witnesses, and when it shows that you have 1 minute remaining, it'll be yellow and it'll turn to red. General Lingale, thank you for your opening remarks and reminding all of us about the unique duties and responsibilities of the Guard. We visited yesterday. You were kind enough to come to my office and talk about some of this, and they have, because they're people who are working in other jobs, most of them during the time, so it takes a great deal of commitment from those in the Guard, but also from their employers. And so it is unique, and I know that we all appreciate them so much because in our own communities, we've seen what they've done so many times. I'd like to start with a question that is probably most on people's mind right now, having to do with the Guard. So I'd like you to give us an update on the recent announcement the National Guard will be support at the border. And if you know this, how many forces are we talking about? Where would they be deployed? What kind of role they would play, and this role comply with our applicable laws? And finally, what's the Pentagon's plan to pay for these forces? I know that you can't, or I'd be surprised you could answer all of those because you don't have all that information, but if you could, answer what you can and let us know how to prepare for the future.
Yes, Chairwoman, thank you for the question. It is important, and it does convey kind of a unique capability that the National Guard has in the homeland. Last week, on the 4th of April, the President had a proclamation suggesting that the National Guard would be used in a Title 32 status to help the Department of Defense assist Department of Homeland Security in border security mission. The border security mission effectively is a national security issue, and the Secretary of Defense, in coordination with the Secretary of Homeland Security, are working together to increase the security on the southwest border, using the National Guards of the states, and right now it's only the states along the southwest border, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and perhaps soon to be California, to deploy their National Guard in a Title 32 status under the command and control of the governors to assist the Customs and Border Protection Agency with security of the border. As of right now, the way it's working is CBP is providing requirements through DHS to the Department of Defense. The Secretary of Defense has created a border security support cell in the OSD staff that is validating those requirements. Once those requirements are validated by the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Security, Homeland Defense and Global Security, which chairs this border security cell, they are relayed to the National Guard in the states to be filled with National Guard soldiers and airmen who can assist CBP in accomplishment of the security. The missions and roles that they are playing on the border security are things that assist and free up the Customs and Border Protection agents to actually go to the border and do law enforcement. The National Guard is doing things such as surveillance, such as maintenance, such as engineering activities, such as transportation and aviation alike, to free up the badges, if you will, to put them on the border. Things that the National Guard is not doing. The National Guard is currently not doing direct law enforcement themselves. They are not doing hands-on work with migrant issues as they come across the border and are apprehended, but not by the National Guard. The National Guard is not doing any of that. As I speak to you today, there are 782 National Guard soldiers identified that are actually on the border assisting CBP in their border security role. The preponderance of those are in Texas and Arizona. It is unknown what the total number will grow to be. They are capped by the Secretary Defense Action Memo to a level no higher than 4,000 total soldiers in support of the mission. With regards to funding, the funding of this is unknown. Exactly how long it's going to last, how big it's going to be, and what the total funding operations required to support it will be. In the Secretary's of Defense Action Memo on the 6th of April, he tasked the Comptroller of the Department of Defense to ascertain sources of funding to support this effort, to make him aware of issues with respect to funding that may impact the mission sets, and if required, to notify him of any reprogramming actions that may be necessary to allot proper funding into the right places so that we can conduct the mission and maintain the readiness of the force. And I would ask that this committee look favorably on any reprogramming actions that would come this direction to use the funds that the National Guard has appropriated for the readiness of the force, such that we can use them to make the force ready for the longer term.
Thank you so much. There may be others that will have questions about that, but we'll now go to Mr. Rubersberger.
Usually, I try not to knock our president. I don't think you get anywhere with it. But when I totally disagree, I do want to make a statement, and then I'm going to get into what my real question will be if I have time. I really think this is really a waste of time for our National Guard to be there. Unfortunately, our president seems to rule more on his instincts than he does on planning. And I would hope that the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of Homeland Security will be able to persuade him where the role is. If you look at the numbers as far as immigration, those numbers are really down. What the real issues are on the border, in my opinion, are drugs and fentanyl, and these are the issues we have to deal with. And I'd rather see him take more DEA agents and put them there than National Guard. I think there are other things that you could do than just being there and support. But with that said, I just felt I had to say that. I'm going to talk about the issue of Task Force ECHO. And this is a groundbreaking Army National Guard task force supporting U.S. Cyber Command at Fort Meade, which Chairman Freelandhausen will tell you is in my district. At least he reminds me of that. Task Force ECHO has proven very successful, and it's my understanding that this mobilization will be continued by a new iteration of Guard members. I applaud the decision to extend this mobilization to conduct critical national cyber missions. This is the first of its kind mobilization that has brought soldiers from 7 different states to conduct missions for U.S. Cybercom. Not only does the continuation of Task Force ECHO make our nation more secure, it enhances partnerships between our Guard and active components, and in addition, benefits states and industry as well. The Task Force ECHO initiative has certainly benefited from the inclusion of experienced Guard soldiers with diverse technical cyber backgrounds. My questions are, first, using Task Force ECHO as an example, are there other similar initiatives you are considering in that field, and what are the challenges you face in supporting such critical national needs?
Thank you, sir, for that question. I mean, across the cyber enterprise, I think the National Guard is able to be a force provider and contribute greatly to the cyber defense of the nation. Task Force ECHO is a great example, sir, of what's going on in Maryland National Guard. I think that the contribution that this task force will make and has made at U.S. Cyber Command is recognized.
And I pointed out because it's very important to move forward and having National Guard involved. The other question I have, General, as you know, the National Guard plays a critical role in deterring Russian aggression. Now, Maryland's state partnership program, for example, has created a top-notch cyber capability in Estonia. I have visited them in Estonia. In August of 2017, the Estonian Defense Forces and the Maryland Army National Guard conducted a joint cyber defense exercise entitled Baltic Jungle. Now, I believe these operations are critical to showcasing to Russia that our National Guard cyber units are just as effective as those in the active component of our military. My question, in your opinion, what is Russia's assessment of our National Guard cyber units? What challenges do you have in recruiting soldiers to fill these roles? I will say I believe you have 500 people in Estonia right now dealing on this cyber issue, and it's very successful.
Sir, I think the Russians look at the National Guard in cyber as they do across every other piece of the military operation that we do. They see us as part of the United States Army and part of the United States Air Force with similar capabilities. And I think that the National Guard cyber capability to bring special cyber relationships that they have and in the state partnership program with Estonia is hugely successful.
Good. Are you back? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, did you have more to say?
No, that's it.
Oh, okay, good. You're back.
Thank you. Chairman Freelandhausen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Certainly on behalf of the committee, thank you for the remarkable things the National Guard does around the world. I know that there is bipartisan support for what we call the NIGRIA accounts, and I think over the last 2 or 3 years, and certainly under the Chairwoman's leadership, those accounts have been robust, and hopefully the equipment that you've requested is we're meeting some of your needs. We're also meeting just the issues of readiness that affect obviously the regular force as well as the National Guard. I too have some questions on the deployment. The Secretary of Defense was specifically authorized under Title 32, Section 502F. Is it authorization for 4,000?
It's up to 4,000. Yes, sir.
It's a little unclear to me, maybe because this is a recent announcement, who's paying for what? You're making a plea for reprogramming, which who is actually paying for what?
Chairman, be clear, as I haven't made a plea for reprogramming yet, because as I said in my remarks, I hope to make it clear that we don't know yet what the total financial cost of this operation is going to be. So under 502F, it is 502F authority, Title 32 is federally funded and temporarily using the accounts of the National Guard, O&M and personnel accounts to fund this operation on the border. And that is, that's the money that I have. So, I mean, that's the National Guard. We'll use those funds to fund the validated requirements that's validated by OSD and authorized to the states to put on the border. And so that's who's paying for this.
So on actually what people are doing, so is there a width and breadth of what people are allowed to do now?
Yes, sir.
Are there limitations? I know there are limitations that that your personnel cannot conduct civilian law enforcement activities. Is that right?
Yes, sir. In 502F status, the actual action memo says specifically that without explicit consent from the Department of Defense, from Secretary Mattis, that they will not do law enforcement activity on the border. That's correct.
There is that term that the National Guard, and this is actually not just in this instance, but in the past, correct me if I'm wrong, that the National Guard has performed what are often referred to of other duties in support of Department of Defense missions. Do you anticipate other duties being given to you? And have they been given to the Guard in the past?
Well, we have performed duties in 502F before. I mean, if you use as an example, after 9/11, when they put National Guard soldiers into the airports to do security, they were federally funded, but yet managed and under the control of the governors in the states with which they perform that duty. Yeah. It's a similar situation here, with which they are being provided federal resources, again, in support of Department of Homeland Security and CBP, in areas that CBP realizes that they need assistance, such that their agents can be freed up to do more direct law enforcement type operations. And
so is the Border Control, is Department of Homeland Security likely to reimburse you for that, or is that something that you're going to be carrying as an ongoing cost?
I believe this is reimbursement is not mandated from the Department of Homeland Security for this particular act. But I would request to get back with you if that's it. But I do not anticipate any reimbursement from the Department of Homeland Security.
Obviously, this is a policy that's been laid down. I think more information rather than less information as it comes to you would be extremely beneficial to all of us here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Capter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, General, and all your colleagues. I'm a big supporter of the Guard, and I represent many of those soldiers that fight for us at home and abroad. Thank you for your work. I'm going to focus just on two areas initially. One is the State Partnership Program, which for Ohio means Hungary and Serbia, but I'm quite interested in California's partnership with Ukraine. And my question really attends to the funding levels in that program. If you could focus on that, what you've requested compared to this current fiscal year. And also a suggestion, because I've just returned from Ukraine, and if we're going to win that battle and somehow blunt Russia's propaganda, which is 40 times what the West pumps in there, we are going to have to deal with the soldiers in the field in a more effective way. And one of the things I discovered is that many of Ukraine's soldiers have PTSD, those who are currently serving, younger soldiers, and also soldiers who fought under the Soviet mandate in Afghanistan from years ago. My question really is, how could you, in your leadership role, provide apps and devices where soldiers who have these illnesses could literally self-treat as opposed to having nothing in the field? Do you have the capability, using the defense health capabilities that exist within DoD and the Guard, to use California or other states who have Ukrainian language-speaking health professionals to try to get apps down into people who literally are facing a third deployment to the front, and they have PTS with no help. How do we deal with that issue?
So, Congresswoman, thank you for that question. So the state partnership program, as you know, in California is very engaged in Ukraine. And they have you know, a wide range of opportunities to help and integrate and assist the Ukraine military forces in a wide number of ways, all through the combatant command. So I think that should they decide that, you know, combatant commander decide that that's a good opportunity and good use of the state partnership program, then those activities could be proposed and part of state partnership activities.
Could you get somebody back to me on that, please?
Well, yes.
I would greatly appreciate that, and I'd like to know if there's funding to do that, if you are asking for sufficient funding to accommodate something like that, if it proves beneficial.
Yes, ma'am, I'll get back to you. I do not have funding that I'm aware of to you know, develop apps and use them in the Ukrainian system. That would probably require some additional funding levels. In general, with regard to the state partnership program funding, we get about $16 million a year for state partnership funding. We get about 8 of that through the Army and the Air Force, and the rest is a congressional ad that we get. Sometimes it's hard for us to use all of the congressional ad because of the timing of the actual budget and when we get the appropriation. We feel like we need about twice that total amount, about $29 million totally, to get all of the state partnership activities. The state partnership has grown now since Ukraine was one of the original 13 members, and now it has grown to 80 partners, and funding commensurately has not grown.
All right.
So I would make a pitch to say that we
Thank
could
you
use
for
more money.
pointing that out, General.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you. I also wanted to
Would
ask
the
you.
gentlewoman yield for a second? I just want to make sure you would yield.
I'm pleased to.
Oh, okay, good. If I understand correctly, just so we're clear, you're at 16 million in that account today, General?
Yes, sir.
And under optimum circumstances, given the demand and increased requests for partnerships, you would need 29 million.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
I thank you, gentlemen, for clarifying that. I also wanted to move to the National Guard Counter-Drug Program. Obviously, Ohio is Heroin Alley and Fentanyl Alley in my district, right near where I live, actually. About a week ago, enough fentanyl was discovered to kill everyone in my district 5 times over. It's just staggering. So my question really is, what are you doing on this front in cooperation with localities or at our ports of entry in order to try to stem the flow and deal with the crime associated with this? I sort of mimic Mr. Ruppersberger's comments. If we're going to send anybody to the border, the 3 buzzards who did this in our district came from Houston, and they drove up. And it was just, I can't tell you what an impact it's had across our community, just the worrisome nature of all of this.
Yes, ma'am. The counter-drug program throughout the National Guard provides a lot of great assistance to the local, state, federal, tribal law enforcement agencies that try to deal with this issue across the nation. Every state has a different problem set in their individual states as determined whether it's where the crime comes from, what the specific problems is, the origination of what it is. But what has grown across the nation is the opioid crisis.
General, could I ask you somehow to provide me a summary of the funding that you're asking for in this account, what currently exists, what could exist, your best practices across the country? I'm specifically interested in Ohio selfishly, but it's connected to every ports of entry in Texas and California and so forth. So I would like to know your broader perspective. Who's in charge of the program? I really would like to meet with those people.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I can come to your office and make sure that you get the right people. But the money that we need,
Yes.
The total program to run the counter-drug program as we do right now is about $200 million, plus $20 million for the 5 schools. And that's the total number that we need to
220 million?
220 million.
Okay, and that's at current levels.
Current levels. Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Let me follow up with Ms. Capter's line of questioning on counter-drug activities. This is an epidemic we've not seen the likes of before. As you well know, we're losing around 60,000 Americans a year on prescription pill and heroin overdoses. Now we have the sinister new twist to that as we've begun to successfully crack down on pills. Heroin becomes cheaper and more available, and now it's being laced with this god-awful sedative fentanyl. At least with pills, you knew the dosage, but with the heroin laced fentanyl, you have no idea what the power of a dosage is. And I'm sure it is having an effect on your recruiting, is it not? The use of drugs?
Sir, recruiting is becoming more of a challenge for us, and people are excluded from joining the military because of previous drug convictions and the like, so it is having an impact. I can't tell you how much, but it is having an impact.
Well, to follow up on Ms. Capter's questions about your counter-drug budget items, you mentioned the 5 regional centers. Some are criticizing those centers that the instructors are retired law enforcement people instead of National Guardsmen. What do you say to that?
Well, sir, I think we run the schools. It's a combination of people who understand how to blend the military and the law enforcement capacity together. I think our goal is to provide the best instructors, regardless of what their background is and where they come. Some are National Guard soldiers and airmen, and others are contractors. And I think that's what we try to do, is keep them filled with the best possible instructors to get the best instruction to the field that we can get.
Tell us what those centers are for and what they do and who runs them and why.
So there's 5 separate centers, and their job is they exist to use our expertise in law enforcement, and many of our Guard members are in their civilian lives law enforcement officers and the like, and professionals, and they provide specific, up-to-date, current instruction on tactics, techniques, procedures, operational issues related to opioids, related to fentanyl, opioid trafficking, and the like, so that we can better detect, interdict, stop the flow of narcotics and illegal drugs across the nation.
Are the centers aiming at stopping the use of drugs by National Guardsmen, or is it a local law enforcement effort?
It's a law enforcement effort, sir. I mean, they don't focus specifically on preventative issues. That's not the role of the National Guard or the drugs. It's to facilitate the law enforcement activities to actually stop, find, interdict illicit drugs and trafficking.
Well, I mean, we have the DEA, we've got local state police, we've got local police, we've got all sorts of people who are devoting themselves entirely to the counter-drug operation. Why do we need these schools that apparently are trying to do the same thing as we have forces already there for?
Sir, I'm told these schools are extremely capable and valuable instructors. I haven't been to one myself, but if you would like, I will go to one and come to your office and give you a more in-depth report on the specific of these schools.
Well, we're spending a good deal of money on these 5 different regional centers whose purpose I have no idea what it is, and why the National Guard is running these training centers, supposedly. Why is that so?
Sir, I think that the individual states that run these, as I say again, the law enforcement agencies that attend them say that the product is a useful product and it's a valuable school for the law enforcement agencies that go, and I really don't have a better answer for you than that.
Well, can you get me something about it?
I will, yes, sir.
There's no one, all of us are deeply concerned about this horrendous epidemic that's sweeping the country unabated, and we've got to marshal our forces to tackle every element. And these training schools may be very critical. I don't know. I hope they are. But we need to know whether or not they are doing their job, and why they're there, and is it a wise investment of our dollars?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. General, we continually talk about readiness in the subcommittee, and it means something to the Guard as well. Could you, given the approximately 344,000 soldiers in the Guard, 60,000 of which are active Guard and Reserve, tell us what readiness means to you and relative to making sure you are in top form? Is there a need to change that ratio, if you would, as to more full-time so that you are prepared? What does readiness mean to you in that regard?
Yes, sir. I think that, for us to quantify the readiness of our units and our formations to do our wartime mission is the most important thing that we do. So do we have the right people? Do we have the right equipment? Have we got the right training? And to do our military job so that we are assessed as capable to bring what the Army and the Air Force need for us to bring. I would tell you that, from a readiness perspective in the National Guard, if we are to make our readiness better and higher, some of the things we've already done to make this operational force more ready are to add additional training devices, like the Army has added from 2 combat training center rotations a year to 4 combat training center rotations a year. That will help grow more ready brigade combat teams for the United States Army. But more fundamentally, the force that generates that readiness, so that when they go to the combat training center, they can actually do the training at this high level of collective training that they're doing. It requires full-time support inside the Army National Guard to build the foundational levels of readiness that we do it, that we need. So right now, though, that full-time number that is close to what we have, about a little less than 60,000 is what's inside the Army National Guard. That is about, of the total force, that's about 16.5% of 343,000 people. I would offer to you that I think that to increase our readiness, we need to raise the level of full-time support inside the Army National Guard.
Have you made a specific request in your budget submission to us as to what that number should be and what the additional cost would be?
So what we've asked for this year is a relatively small number. It's 440 additional recruiters, such that we can go recruit more people into...
Let me ask you this, because I have a couple other, and we have some other members. Over and above those recruiters, if you had the resources for more active Guard and Reserve for that readiness, could you effectively and efficiently use it? And if so, could you provide the subcommittee with that number?
Yes, sir, I could.
Okay. Next question I have, and I would ask it for the record. Could you tell us what day you were informed of the new policy relative to the use of the National Guard on the border?
What day did
I don't need it now, but when were you told about this change in your responsibility on the border? Just what day? And secondly, were you consulted and asked for your advice as to the design of this new policy before that day?
Okay.
I would be curious, were you?
I was not.
Okay. I would not ask you to go further. I would simply say I respect your service to this country. I respect the position you have as Chief of the Reserve, and I speak only for myself. If I'm going to make a change in policy, I'd at least talk to you. I have no further questions.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. General, good to see you again, and thanks for taking care of the good people in Georgia. We've got a great team there of men and women, led by Joe Girard, and I know you've been working hand in hand there, and we thank you for that. My question is more related to the cyber mission teams and the objectives coming up, and just want to get your thoughts and understand a little bit more about the roadmap and your plan to reach the full operational capability, which is scheduled for 2024. Is the Guard's goal to stand up each of these full operational capabilities planned at one time simultaneously, all 11 teams, or is there sort of a plan to stagger that out? And maybe you could just share with us some of the challenges that you face and whether or not you're currently on track to meet some of your objectives for 2024.
Yes, sir. I think that the 11 teams will stagger over time. We will build them over time. Part of the reasons for that is the allocations of school slots that we get in order to get the folks that we need and to train them to become these cyber warriors. I think we are on track to be, my latest number was actually 2022, I think, was when we thought we were going to have all 11 teams up and trained and ready to go for the National Guard. Great examples of innovation in Georgia is standing up a cyber cell at Augusta University, and this new Cyber Center of Excellence stand up there paid for by Georgia as giving the National Guard a piece in there to actually recruit some of the men and women who are going to school in the cyber field there. So I think we're on track. I think cyber continues to be a growing part of everything that we do, and in our full spectrum competition across the globe, we're under attack every day in the cyber domain.
That's great.
And so I think it's important.
Well, it's good news on the progress, and thank you for your partnership with the state. And I know the state has committed a lot of dollars to help out there. So thank you for your work with them. And then Admiral Rogers recently described the Guard's cyber contribution as providing a surge capability. Can you explain the specific missions where the surge capability would be used? And just give us a little, maybe what your forecast would be for the future.
So, I mean, the Army and the Air use their cyber mission forces differently. The Air Force has always 2 cyber mission teams on duty all the time, cyber protection teams, for a 6-month period. Then they come off and 2 more will go on. And the Army doesn't do business that way, so the Army looks for opportunities or requirements to surge the force. Once they have all 11 cyber protection teams built and trained, as requirements dictate, they will call those forces to duty and use them as the situation dictates.
And then lastly, are there any cyber missions the Guard could contribute to that are more routine and enduring in nature? Any, as you look ahead, anything we can help with, and anything you can maybe give us a little direction on?
So, every state has a cyber defensive cyber operations team. It's a small team. Some states are experimenting with looking at how to use those teams more broadly as a state active duty assets under the command of the governor. So some states in preparation for election cycles have used their cyber operations elements to actually check the security of their state .gov networks. I think that there's room to grow there in the unique space that the National Guard has as a state asset as well, is to take these trained cyber folks and use them to help the state in keeping their network secure as well. So there's work going on there as well, sir.
Great. Well, thank you for your service. Thanks for your commitment and investment in this area. It's a very new and growing and intense theater, and I'm glad you're getting engaged in it. Thank you very much, General.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Ms. McCollum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you here today, General. Thank you for all that you do. I'm going to kind of go from one extreme to another. I'm going to talk about modernization, and then I'm going to talk about recovery. They both have something in common, and that's making sure that our servicemen and women have what they need. So I'd like to get your thoughts on the Army's Aviation Modernization Program. Since the active component continues to lean on the reserves as an operational force globally, I think it's important that the Guard benefit from the modernization and the aviation that's happening. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on the necessity for our reserve components to benefit from the modernization. You talked about readiness and training, but there's also the hardware that goes with the men and women we call up to serve. So in the FY19 budget that addresses Army aviation modernization, I'd like to know what the plan going forward is to ensure that the Guard shares in this Army's modernization plan. And then on recovery, as you know, Puerto Rico is still recovering from the devastation that hit from Hurricane Maria last year. I was just down on the island, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, looking at recovery work being done by EPA, Fish and Wildlife, our National Park Service. And when driving to the park assets, I drove by the National Guard. I didn't have an opportunity, I didn't have enough time in my schedule to be in meetings with the Guard, but I did meet Guard and Reserve members who proudly serve and are very instrumental in the recovery effort. So I would like you to maybe tell the committee what critical resources you don't have in Puerto Rico. It's still running on generators. Vieques probably is 4 years out from having electricity, and it's not due to the willpower of the people of Puerto Rico. It just has to do with years of neglect in working together with our territory in Puerto Rico to make sure that they had what they needed to be self-sufficient and resilient. Puerto Rico's economy was hit really hard by the Great Recession. They haven't recovered from the hurricane yet. The next hurricane season's on the way, and they know about it. So I'd like to know how the economic situation is affecting your service members. Some of them are still without power, and they still have drills and things to do. And unemployment is a significant concern. And I'm wondering if you're seeing a drop in recruitment and retention because of the economy there, but also because of the strain that the hurricane has really put on a lot of the people in Puerto Rico, taking care of their family, their communities, and then being able to proudly serve in the Reserve and Guard components.
Thank you, ma'am, for those questions. Well, with respect to modernization and aviation modernization specifically, as I said in my opening remarks, the difference with today's operational National Guard, really operational reserve component is we used to modernize the active component and cascade all the old stuff into the reserve component, and that's the way it worked. That model I would advocate does not exist, does not work anymore. We're continuously deployed with our active component. We train with our active component. When the active component gives all the old stuff to the reserve component, it tends not to be maintained, logistically supported, less deployable. So, it is that as the Army modernizes its fleet of helicopters and tanks and everything in the Army, I advocate inside the Pentagon and with the Army that they modernize the Army National Guard in a concurrent and balanced manner. Sometimes it's hard to do that. I mean, the Army is a big organization and has modernization priorities and does it, but we are getting Blackhawks, new Blackhawks. I flew in one just last weekend that had 120 hours, a brand new C-1 or Blackhawk M model. And they're modernizing some of our older ones into Victor models, and we're getting some new Chinooks as well. I think readiness of the force and modernization of the force is important. The Apaches in the Army National Guard are not manned at 24 Apaches like the Army should be. Even some of the Army battalions don't have 24 Apaches. So that makes it difficult for the Army National Guard to be as ready in the Apache business as we may need to be. Should they need to use all of our Apache battalions at once or in short order, they would not be as ready as we would want them to be because they simply don't have enough iron to be ready. In general, we're part of the Army's modernization plan, and when they do their future vertical lift analysis and what's that going to look like, we have a member of the National Guard on that team. And so when they figure out what that is, we'll be part of it, and my advocacy will be to modernize the National Guard in a concurrent manner with the active component. With respect to Puerto Rico, I too was down there numerous times, and Hurricane Hurricane Maria devastated the place. It just absolutely devastated the place, and it will be years before they are completely recovered and have done it. How long it will be before all of the people have power, I can't tell you. That's that, and there's MILCON required to repair the destroyed National Guard facilities and the like. There are still hundreds of Puerto Rico National Guard soldiers that are on active duty to mitigate the impacts from that disaster. So I think that it's going to be a long time before they recover, and we continue to assist them every way we can to make sure that they recover from that devastation.
Madam Chair, I think we should maybe ask if there's anything that this committee should be doing to support the National Guard down there. They're the first line of defense. It takes a long time to get down there. Our Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, EPA, you wouldn't believe the way that the federal team stood up down there with doing things, but they're still running on generators, and we need to make sure before the next season that they have everything that they need at the National Guard.
Thank you for that, and I completely agree with you, and thank you for taking the trip to see that. I think we sort of out of sight, out of mind on some of that, and when you hear that they're on generators after this period of time is really significant. Mr. Diaz-Balart.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. General, again, thanks for your service. Let me focus on the state partnership program, which has been a great tool to develop relationships with our neighbors, and particular in the Western Hemisphere, Central America, South America. The Florida National Guard has partnered with Virgin Islands, with Guyana, and others, and so it's also an important part of what, frankly, what Southcom's mission is, right, is to develop those relationships. And I think a lot of folks don't understand your role and the National Guard's role, and it's a key role. So just, do you have the adequate funding to continue that, what I believe is a vital mission? And if you could just pretty much talk to us a little bit about what you're doing and what some of your activities are, because I don't think a lot of folks know that it's, the direct involvement of the National Guard, and you go down there, you see it. So thank you, General.
Yes, sir. Incredibly important program. The National Guard's grown now to more than 80 partnerships. Soon to be announced, several more will take us over 80. And we run the gamut from full spectrum combat operations to disaster response and civil control of the military and everything in between. Growth of our NCO Corps and the NCO development of our partner nations to peacekeeping operations, humanitarian assistance operations, all of those things. And we do it all over the world. We build what really the product of this is trust and relationships between nations, and never more evident than across Europe as Russian aggression in Crimea and the partnerships in the Baltics and former Soviet bloc countries were absolutely instrumental in assuring our partners and allies that we were there and part of them. More than 80 times we have had co-deployments to the war where a partner nation will deploy to Afghanistan or Iraq with a co-deployment with our partner nations. So couldn't be more cost effective. It's a very high leverage, low cost program. Department of Defense will spend more than $3 billion in defense support, security cooperation. This program right now is funded at a level from all sources at about $16 million. And earlier I mentioned we need $29 million to continue the level of activity, to build those meaningful relationships and to do meaningful training across the spectrum in accordance with and under the direction of the COCOMs, where these countries are, the combatant commands. Amazingly important product, unique in the Department of Defense. Really, it is a thing that brings nations closer together to do things together. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, General. And Madam Chairwoman, I want to thank you because Southcom, as I always mention, is one of those that, since there aren't a lot of public issues that come up in the hemisphere, and we kind of tend to forget about Southcom until something happens in the hemisphere. But I want to thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for always not forgetting Southcom and for your leadership there in general. I agree with you. We may have some, even when we have some difficult relationships, the military-to-military relationship is crucial, and in some cases even more crucial when we have some iffy partners, right? Yes, and I just wanted to, again, I don't know if a lot of our colleagues outside of this committee know the importance not only of those programs. I think they know that, but that the National Guard is a big part of that. So thank you, General. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of quick questions. First, thank you so much. The European Deterrence Initiative is critical, and I think the more we see the level of threats that are facing our democracy here in the United States, as well as what's going on in Europe, to continue to read and dive into some of these issues, it's absolutely incredible that most Americans don't really understand the level of threat that we're under right now. And so I appreciate what you're doing and what the Guard is doing. I have a question. I know the Army plans to stand up 6 security force assistant brigades, the SFABs. 5 are going to be active duty. 1's going to be National Guard. Can you give us an update on that and what it's looking like from your end?
Yes, sir. The single Security Force Assistance Brigade is standing up across 5 separate states. Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and Florida, and Georgia, I believe, are the 5 states. Ohio will get a share of that SFAB, and it's about 65 people, I believe, and we are, I think, on track for, I have to get back with you on exactly when it's supposed to be up and running in IOC. It's not in my brain here right now, but I'll get back with you on exactly when we expect it to be up and operational, but part of that is coming to Ohio.
Great, thank you. On the EDI, go over those numbers that you mentioned again when Mr. Diaz-Balart was asking you. How much money goes to the Guard for EDI?
So, no, EDI is different than SPP. You know.
No, I know. I'm going backwards.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd have to go look. We've got lots of National Guard forces who are mobilizing into Europe with European deterrence initiative. Yes. I can't give you that number here. I'd have to go figure it out.
I just want to see a comparison of the two, so we'll get that. On the issue of recruiting and retention, one of the issues that keeps becoming an issue, has been an issue, is the issue of fitness and the ability to recruit. Can you talk to us a little bit about meeting the standards and any changes you may have seen over the past few years for our inability to kind of meet some of these numbers because of the fitness goals aren't being met?
Yes, sir. I mean, just in general across America, there tends to be a less fit general younger population than there once was. Fitness standards to be in the military are, they are what they need to be. And so it is getting harder for not just the Army National Guard or International Guard to find people that meet recruiting standards, and whether it's not just fitness, it's across the spectrum of education and suitability and the like. So it's, this year, I would offer that the National Guard, Army National Guard, may actually not meet our end strength at the end of the year that we had at 343,500. We are going to struggle to meet that total number. For the past 5 years, the National Guard has failed to meet our recruiting goals of how many people. We met end strength because we were able to retain more of the current force.
Right.
But I think we're going to see that as more broadly a problem that will require changes to how we market, changes perhaps even increased resources to how we market, more recruiters, different approaches to try and get people to fill our ranks.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, I just think this is a broader discussion we need to have, because this is an issue that keeps coming up. The demands are greater, and I don't know if we need to do some kind of national initiative led by the military about general health, but it's really diminished our ability to recruit the kind of soldier and airmen and seamen that we need. And again, we get locked in these little silos of it's a defense problem, it's also a societal problem, and the two do interface with each other.
Yes, sir.
Every single day. So that may be part of a broader conversation we need to have. Yield back.
The good news, the bad news, Miguel, is that there's lots of interest in what you're in charge of. The bad news, it means you have to come back.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, General, for being here. And as always, we appreciate your service to our country and that of your families as well. And for all of the guardsmen and women that you represent all across our country. As you're aware, we discussed this yesterday. We in Alabama are very, very excited about the Air Force's decision to field the F-35 at Danley Field for the men and women of the 187th at that fighter wing. We're very proud of their capability. We know at the end of the day it was those men and women that contributed to that decision. Of course, the Red Tails also have a storied combat record, and the River Region is extremely proud and supportive of our Air Force and our Air National Guard. I just thought this would be a good opportunity for you to provide us an update as it relates to the F-35 rollout, maybe a more definitive timeline as you see it as it relates to these Guard units that have just been given the opportunity to field that mission.
Yes, ma'am. Well, congratulations, Alabama. I wish I could take credit for that, but the Air Force has a very defined process which analyzes basing criteria, and Danley Field came out in appropriate manner at the top of that process for the Air Force. I believe that there's no change from what you've heard before, that I'm able to really update you. I think that 2024 is that the time frame that
2023 is what we were told the aircraft might arrive, but
that has, to my knowledge, has not changed for Alabama. But if it's changed, I'll look into it and provide you an update immediately if anything changes.
well, we appreciate that, and again, look forward to continuing that conversation. But again, just on behalf of the men and women of the 187th, we're all very thrilled. One of the things that comes up in all of our discussions across all of our military-wide is the issue of pilot shortages. I don't know if you've already addressed this, and I apologize I came in late, but I just would like for you to tell us from your perspective as it relates to the National Guard how you're being affected by pilot shortages, and then really provide us, if you can, and maybe not at this time, but any opportunities that you see from on the policy side, how we can be helpful on that front.
So yes, the nationwide issue with regard to having the number of pilots that our nation needs, both in the commercial sector and in the military, is impacting the National Guard. It is not impacting us as much as it's impacting the active component. The good news for the reserve component is you can be both an airline pilot and a military pilot. With respect to how our individual units are done, I would say that our total pilots, we're short about 15% of what we need. In general, and these are broad terms, I can get you exact terms if you wish, but in broad terms, we're actually able to maintain and recruit all of our part-time force. We have a lot of people who are leaving the military, who want to stay involved in military aviation. So in many cases, not in all, there are some areas where that is not true, but broadly, we are able to keep the part-time force. Where we're having trouble keeping people is qualified instructor pilots, the full-time force, who actually who want to be for the full-time people. More specifically, it's the technician full-time force that is very, very hard to retain. We simply can't pay them enough. People tend to want if they're going to be full-time, they want the opportunity to retire after 20 years of service and perhaps have a follow-on military career. So that particular aspect of our full-time force is harder to keep. The active guard reserve slots in the full-time, there are many people in the active component who decide that they don't want to move as much anymore, but they don't want to be an airline pilot, so that they will move and live in Montgomery, Alabama, and be a full-time pilot in the 187th Fighter Wing, just like similar status as active duty Air Force, and retire at 20 years and keep the benefits and the like. So if there was a policy issue that could help us, it would be to help us increase the active guard reserve billets versus the technician billets across our force. In general, I think as our force is migrating towards this operational force, you will see a request from us. In fact, we submitted a report through OSD to Congress on the analysis of our full-time force. You will see us move more towards a request for an active guard reserve force, I think, as opposed to a technician full-time force. We still see that as a valued resource in some ways, but over time that will be something we may ask you for.
Well, again, thank you for your service. We appreciate you being here today, and I yield back.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Womack.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for being here late. As I told the distinguished chair here that chairing the House Budget Committee is just jerking all my time away from me, and I miss sitting here on this dais and engaging in military discussions. I want to associate myself with the remarks of my friend Tim Ryan over here about medical fitness. I encountered that as a commander. Medical fitness is a critical problem across the spectrum of society, but certainly with regard to the military, because we have certain standards that we got to have, and if they don't have them, we can't take them. I want to ask a question about retention, recruiting, and retention. It is my belief that as our National Guard and Reserve components are utilized more and more in our national defense posture, and I know General Cademy has talked about the Guard 4.0 or whatever his term is for it, and the notion that we need to increase the training days available to a lot of the people, particularly those going into the box, that sort of thing. I get all that. There has got to be a sweet spot in there somewhere, though, with our employer support to the Guard and Reserve, with our families. We're talking about recruiting problems right now, not being able to meet mission. I would guess that improved economic conditions in this country are causing people to have better jobs, and the need to be in the part-time military may not be as attractive as it once was. So do you have those concerns about the other elements of society that have an impact on our ability to recruit and retain people into our Guard structure?
Yes, sir. I do have those concerns. You know, the demand on the part-time force and you know, the reserve component brings an immense amount of combat capability to the Department of Defense at a lower cost, because we don't get paid when we're not being used, and that's value in that. As long as we keep them ready and then they're properly equipped, they can go to war and provide combat capacity when we need it. I think that General Cademy is spot on. The Army National Guard is different now than when you or I was actually a young officer in the military. There's more expected to be used. We have a different force, though. The force that has gotten into the National Guard expects to be deployed. They want to be deployed. They're willing to train 45, 50, 60 days a year, provided it's predictable, provided that when they do train, at the end of that, there is a meaningful reason why to deploy them. So whether they deploy to the Sinai, or whether they deploy to Bosnia or Kosovo, or whether they deploy to ERI in Europe, or to Pacific Pathways in the Pacific, that there's a reason for the employer to see that this soldier or airman is actually contributing to the national defense. And there is a sweet spot in there where we will break it. And if we get past the point where the employers don't support our members, and right now that I had met with the president of ESGR 2 weeks ago, and while there are pockets of people where employers are getting weary, overall we still broadly have great support from our employers. So it's incumbent on us to be predictable when we can, and let people see the meaningful impact that this work does for the national defense of the United States.
There was some discussion about pilot shortage, and I want to be careful I don't run out of time here. Have you considered this Title 32, Title 5 exchange program? I guess it's what, I don't know what the percentage is of the mix, but have you considered using any of the personnel that could be used in that Title 5 force mix as an enhancement to addressing some of this pilot shortage?
So, sir, I don't, in the National Guard case, we don't see the Title V as a good resource to put as our aviators, our combat-coded unit type codes that actually deploy and go to war. We see the best use of the Title V resource in the National Guard case as those that don't necessarily have deployed operational requirements to go do. So I don't see the Title V resource helping us in that regard with respect to the Title V issue.
Okay. And then finally, a question about combat aviation. We've had a long discussion about it over the last several years. So where are we on making sure that we continue to have at least that force mix in the reserve component?
So in accordance with the National Commission on the Future of the Army, we have stationed now at long last, the 4 Apache battalions that are in the Army National Guard. They went to North Carolina, South Carolina, Utah, and then they split between Texas and Mississippi. That's where they are. The stationing decision has been made. Also, in that same report, it said, hey, you're going to have 18 Apaches in each one of those battalions. And a little bit later in the report, it said, hey, if there's a opportunity presents itself, you should find a way to plus these up to 24 Apaches per battalion.
Yeah.
And where we are right now is, right now, as we deploy a battalion, we are scraping from the other 3 battalions iron to make sure that they're ready to go and they have their full complement of aircraft. So it's challenging. Should we ever have to deploy more than one at a time, it could be challenging to the mission.
Before I yield back, were you happy with Ingria in this last Omni?
Thank you for Ingria.
I figured you'd say
420
that.
million in each Army and Air was substantial. Thank you very much to the entire committee. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you for your service. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have a closing comment from Mr. Vislowski, and then the panel 2 will prepare to take over.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would ask for the record, because I know we have to go in follow-up to Mr. Womack's question, and again, this would be for the record. How many complaints or actions has the Employer Support Guard and Reserve dealt with for employers not working with Guardsmen in deployment? And the last observation I would make as a former seminarian, I would quote one sentence from another former seminarian, the governor of California, in his letter of yesterday, where he said, I agree with the Catholic bishops who have said that the local, state, and federal officials should work collaboratively and prudently in the implementation of this deployment, talking about the border, ensuring that the presence of the National Guard is measured and not disruptive to community life. General, I do have a profound respect for you, and I know that is how you will conduct yourself, and you will ask the Guard to conduct themselves, and I thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
This concludes panel 1. Thank you, General Langell, for your attention here and what you're doing here. We'll now move to panel 2, and they will be introduced.
Thank you, Chairwoman.
No charge for the softball question.
Thank you very much.
Be seated. If you'll be seated, we'll begin. Our witnesses for panel 2 are Lieutenant General Charles D. Luckey, Chief Army Reserve, Vice Admiral Luke M. McCollum, Chief of Navy Reserve, Lieutenant General Rex C. McMillan, Commander Marine Reserve, Lieutenant General Marianne Miller, Chief of Air Force Reserves. Welcome to all of you here. We appreciate it very much. We appreciate your being able to share your information. General Miller, in panel 1, the committee noted the recent death of 2 Air Force reservists who died on March 15th when their helicopter crashed in western Iraq. The committee recognizes the sacrifices of these 2 reservists, the active Air Force officer and 4 Air Guardsmen who also perished in this crash. Please express our deepest sympathy to the families. We look forward to your testimony and responses. However, because of very limited time, please make your opening statements as brief as possible, and we will ask for the members of the subcommittee. We'll limit your questions and the answer complete to 4 minutes, and you will see there'll be lights. Green means they'll start speaking. When it goes to yellow, it means you have 1 minute left, and then to red. General Luckey, we'll start with you.
So, Chairwoman Granger and Ranking Member Visklowski, it's an honor to be back here with you. It's been about a year. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through my prepared remarks, and out of courtesy to the committee, I'd rather answer questions as appropriate for the committee. I would just like to say, for all the distinguished members that are here, how much I appreciate the support of this committee and the House of Representatives and the Senate as well. For the support over the last year for America's Army Reserve. I want to specifically highlight the NAGRIA funding that we received last year, and give this committee and the Congress of the United States a high level of assurance that money is being put to extraordinarily good use, to include modernizing some systems. We've purchased some JLTVs, which we'll be getting in the fall, and as you well know, that's a new capability for the Army, and it's a capability the Army Reserve needs to start training on, so we've done that. We're also using that funding, and we'll continue to look to use that funding to help us build more resilience. Candidly, I've learned a lot over the last year, particularly in response to the situations both in Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Florida, and Texas as it pertains to Harvey, Irma, and Maria. So, again, we're using that money wisely and prudently, but also it gives me tremendous flexibility operation. I appreciate it very much. I appreciate your continued support. Just very quickly, just to update you, our Ready Force X, RFX construct's coming along well. I'm happy to answer any questions the committee has about how that's going, the balance between readiness in the force, but also stress on the force. And I would also acknowledge that, as I said last year, I need the committee's continued support in messaging the messengers in America, using your voice to influence those influencers out there, and encouraging them to continue to remain in a partnership with America's Army Reserve as it pertains to sharing the best talent in America. So I'm talking employers, whether it be in academia, private sector, public sector, employers that are continuing to share their talent with us in behalf of the national security of the United States of America. And then last but not least, by any means, thanks again for the committee's support and continued concern about our families, who, as we all know, support this team day in and day out. And in fact, as soon as I leave here today, I'll be going to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas this afternoon to talk to the pre-command course, and then on to Minneapolis, St. Paul to talk with the team leaders that support our family support programs and making sure that they're getting the support and schooling that they need. And my wife, Julie, will be joining me in that trip as well to support them. So, again, I appreciate your support. I look forward to your questions, and I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you.
Chairman Granger and Ranking Member Visklowski, thank you very much. And in the sake of time, I'll also have brevity in my remarks. Just to point out, just like my colleagues to my right and left, right here as we sit, we have our men and women serving around the world. And when they serve around the world, that means they're absent from their employers, and they're also absent from their families. And supporting them, the unwavering support that we've been given, we're very grateful for. They are force multipliers as we look at how the contribution of not only from unique skill sets, but also credible combat capability, and your very generous support in supporting them from programs such as Yellow Ribbon, redeployment support, family programs, and certainly the training dollars, the readiness dollars to allow them to do that. Mobilizations continue, and our guidance to our force is to be ready, and we focus on generating readiness and to do that in various forms, from individual readiness to joint readiness with groups at the unit level and at the combat level, integrated force. Just yesterday, the Harry S. Truman Strike Group departed for deployment, and this afternoon, the Carl Vinson Strike Group returns from a deployment. So in that portfolio, it's very symbolic of how the reserve component supports the integrated force. The Navy Reserve uses discretionary RPN, and that's how we generate our readiness, individual readiness, and then sets and reps, as we call it, for integrated readiness, and your continued support there is very appreciated. NGRIA funding is another tool and lever that we use to have niche purchase power where we can, in broad scale, support our sailors broadly, and your continued support there in a flexible fashion is very much appreciated. And finally, one last point in a piece of our hardware portfolio is our Strike Fighter FA-18s. We do operate the legacy aircraft. We're asked to do integrated ops, adversary flyings to certify our battle strike groups before they deploy, and in that regard, interoperability is key. And we look forward to future conversations with Congress as we begin to recapitalize those assets. And finally, I would just say, in spite of the many challenges that we have in managing operations, personnel, and other things that a commander has to face, one of the greatest privileges we have is to lead and serve with and serve our men and women, and to be with them. Matter of fact, I'll be leaving this afternoon to go and spend time into operations to witness this, and it's our greatest privilege, and with your support, we'll continue to do that. And it's our honor to be here, and look forward to answering any questions.
Chairman Granger, Ranking Member Visklosky, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to testify on behalf of the Commandant of the Marine Corps about your Marine Corps Reserve. I'm honored to be here with my fellow Reserve Component Service Chiefs, and I'll be brief. I've been at the helm of Marine Forces Reserve for 2.5 years, and I'm pleased to inform you that your Marine Corps Reserve is thriving. Morale remains high, as evident by Reserve Component end strength climbing to 99% of our total requirement, our re-enlistment rate increasing over 25% during the past 3 years, all while the demand for reserve support to combatant commanders' requirements continues to rise. The responsibility that we carry in Marine Forces Reserve is to be able to respond tonight and on a moment's notice with fully manned, trained, equipped, and superbly led compatible units that can instantly and seamlessly plug into active component formations. The critical capabilities provided by Marine Forces Reserve to the total force increases the lethality of the Corps and contributes to the competitive advantage maintained over our adversaries. At any given time, Marine Forces Reserve stands ready to provide a brigade-size element of Reserve Marines and sailors fully trained for combat operations to support the active component in order to form a total force fight tonight capability, while the remainder of our force remains poised to augment and reinforce given amounts of pre-deployment training based on their wartime mission assignments. I'd like to leave this distinguished body with 2 thoughts on how continued support from Congress can result in a more lethal Marine Corps Reserve force. Number 1, Reserve Marines have 38 training days per year, and every scheduled event is preparation for combat. Missed training opportunities are often unrecoverable in terms of personnel, material, and training readiness, while morale and retention of the force suffers. During the shutdown on January 20th, almost 8,000 personnel across 62 units had their drill weekend canceled or reduced, resulting in lost training opportunities. I cannot afford to lose 1 minute of training for our nation's most precious assets, our young volunteer men and women that make up your Marine Corps Reserve. Therefore, I cannot overemphasize how a lapse of appropriations negatively impacts readiness across the Reserve Force, and I thank you in advance for your continued support through timely appropriations. Number 2, the Marine Corps Reserve benefits from the National Guard and Reserve Equipment Appropriation. I want to extend my gratitude for your continued support of NGRIA and would appreciate greater spending flexibility within this appropriation in order to procure critical shortfall items, and modernize equipment and systems. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairwoman Granger, Ranking Member Visklosky, and members of the subcommittee, I'm honored to be here today to have the opportunity to report on the state of America's Air Force Reserve. Today I'm joined by Command Chief Master Sergeant Erica Kelly, Command Chief for the Air Force Reserve. At any given moment on any day, there are over 6,500 active citizen airmen stationed stateside and deployed around the world, all supporting our nation's defense. There is no distinction between our active guard and reserve airmen. We are lethal. We are privileged to defend this great nation. We are honored to serve alongside our joint partners and our allies, and ready to make the ultimate sacrifice for our country. During last year's posture hearing, I spoke about the pilot and maintenance retention challenge that we faced. During the flight line, or today, the flight line manning for our part-time force of citizen airmen remains very strong. It's nearly 100%. However, the steady demand on airline pilots and that civilian industry aircraft maintainers continues to impact the retention for our full-time technician force. In response to these challenges, we continue to pursue the use of bonuses, incentive pays, and special salary rates for our pilots and our maintenance force. Though this approach has positively impacted retention, it may not be sufficient for the long-term solution. We need to continue to discuss other full-time options with you all and incentives with your staff, and we need to garner support for these options to improve our manning over time. Our nation's Air Force Reserve is a strong, resilient force of airmen, civilians, and contractors. We are postured to ensure we preserve our foundational strength, providing that daily operational capability and strategic depth for which our nation depends. We will continue to sharpen our edge for the fight and improve our readiness to win anytime, anywhere. We are focused to recruit critical talent and retain critical skills to expand our competitive edge across all missions. America's Air Force Reserve continues to treasure and to strengthen the bond between the citizens of our nation and the airmen who answer the call to defend our freedoms. I am honored to represent all of our airmen and their loved ones today, and I thank this committee for your enduring support, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know people will ask about readiness and modernization, and we'll submit that for the record for all of you, but I want to follow up on a conversation I just had with the National Guard in Puerto Rico. And by the way, when you come to Minneapolis-St. Paul, the forecast will be 38, but it will be sunny. We still have snow on the ground.
I've heard it's getting colder too, but.
Yeah, you don't want to come Sunday. So, General Lucky, if I could just talk to you for a second about Puerto Rico. I had the opportunity of being with the Fish and Wildlife and EPA, but I was also with the Park Service and the Forest Service. And I was with a gentleman from the Forest Service who is going to be retiring shortly, but also continues to serve in the Army Reserve. And so we had a great conversation, and I made it about personal struggles that they're having in Puerto Rico, being in the Guard, being in the Reserve, and at the same time, the federal responsibilities that Fish and Wildlife, Park Service, EPA, you wouldn't believe what our federal employees were doing down there to help with the recovery. Park Service actually, at one of the forts, had people, supplies, and some of the police from Puerto Rico had their equipment in there to protect it. So I want to make sure that you have what you need, because we have another hurricane season coming up. Generators, supplies, equipment, equipment that might be on a wish list to help with some of the things going down there. And so along with the economy, the stress on the reserve components down there, not only taking care of their family, their community, and then fulfilling their responsibilities as they're called up to help their fellow American citizens. Can you just kind of tell me what we need to be doing down there to help you be ready? Hurricane season's coming quickly. I think this needs to be a priority.
So Congresswoman McCollum, thanks for the question, and it's great to see you again. So just to sort of level the bubbles, I was in Puerto Rico last weekend for a couple reasons. One of which was to go back. As you probably know, I was there about 6 weeks after Maria hit, and So I've been keeping a very close eye on the situation. As you know, we have thousands of Army Reserve soldiers, family members down there. Also, one of my installations, as you know, Army Reserve installations, Fort Buchanan is there, and frankly played a key role as a platform to support a lot of activities there very early on. So let me assure you, first of all, that I'm paying very close attention to this situation, both in terms of how we're recovering from what happened and also preparing for what is possibly going to happen next. In fact, the ranking member and I talked about this yesterday briefly. So from an investment strategy perspective, in terms of reconstituting resilience and capability, as I touched on just a minute ago in my opening statement remarks, looking at investment strategy to not only reconstitute, particularly the spot power generation and water purification capabilities that in some extent we have stressed mightily, as you well know, over the last 9 to 10 months. But in addition to reconstitute, but actually increasing the capacity of us to be able to reassemble and surge that capability on even a larger scale than we did last year. As you know, in the course of literally weeks, following the storm, the senior leader on the island, from a federal perspective, the senior military leader on the island was an Army Reserve general. I don't know if you met General Dusty Schultz when you were down there. She commands the 1st MSC. We, under my command authorities, as a commanding general of the Army Reserve, placed all forces in both the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico under her control so she could retask, organize as required to get after things, acknowledging that in some cases our soldiers were their lives were so disrupted they didn't have the ability to help their neighbors because they had to help themselves. But over half of the force that we had in Puerto Rico was able to rise to the challenge and help their partners out. So from a financial perspective, I think I'm okay, frankly. Thanks to your help, thanks to this committee's help, I've been able to reprioritize within the degree of funding that we had to prioritize some funding to get back at that resilience, particularly in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. I would acknowledge the Virgin Islands were devastated very much, as you well know. I'm confident that we're paying very close attention to this. So it's one more thing, and I don't want to take all your time, but one other thing I want you to know. I'm also very cognizant of the fact that as we continue to pursue federal missions, so for instance, the 210th, our regional support group that is going to be going to Fort Bliss, Texas this fall to support an Army mission at Fort Bliss. I'm very cognizant, and I talked to a lot of family members who are very concerned about if another storm hit, would their service member be able to come home? I reassured them that we would manage every one of these issues, one soldier at a time, one family at a time. But you have my strongest assurance that I'm paying very close attention to the situation and very sensitive to the concerns that you raised.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my next stop's the Virgin Islands. I didn't want to not focus on each one together, but individually. So thank you, and I'll follow up before I go there with you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. It's good to see all of you, and thank you for, again, your service. I want to talk a little bit about the Chairwoman when she began. She mentioned the tragedy, right, that took place recently, and so there's been some reports that potentially there's a connection between some of the accidents that have taken place and frankly the inadequate funding that was taking place. And so I'd really kind of like to hear from you about whether you think that there is a potential connection between inadequate funding to things like some of these tragic accidents that have taken place, and also your impressions of where we are now with the 18 omnibus, and obviously we're already starting the 19 bill. And where do you see the potential for readiness for training, et cetera? So if you would just kind of, and I don't know who wants to, maybe start with the Air Force, since that's what most recent tragedy.
Yes, thank you, Congressman. I do not think it's related to the budget stress. Actually, the Air Force Reserve is going to be the investigating officer on that accident in Afghanistan. And thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for your response or your condolences to Bill Posh and to Carl Innes and his family. So thank you for that. I don't think it's connected. We are looking in, as an Air Force and an Air Force Reserve, we are looking at, there's been a slight increase in Category C mishaps, which were the lesser mishaps due to the cost threshold, and we're looking into that, just digging a little bit deeper as to why. So, but I don't think I don't think that the crash in Afghanistan is related to the budget, the stress that we've had. And I think, readiness overall, if you look at 18 compared to 19, 18 was that boost that we needed, and thank you very much for all the money that came to us in this execution year to get after readiness. We're making incredible strides at the unit level. We have 47,000 folks in the unit getting after the mission every day across every mission set, and we've used every dollar that we've been given to actually get up on the plateau as fast as we can. And we're going to, in 18, for the remainder of 18 and the increase in funding that we've gotten for 19, we will continue that climb towards lethality, which the National Defense Strategy demands from us. So the airmen are excited about actually being able to do the job that they signed up for. We've actually told them you can stop doing certain, for the next 6 months, you can put these things aside and you can get after readiness. So thank you for the increase in the 18. 19, as I said, just gets us further down the path of readiness. We've, in the Air Force Reserve, we have $50 more million for flying hours, particularly in the C-17 and the C-5, which helps tremendously for our readiness. WSS, we're funded at 76% baseline, 83 when you add OCO, so thank you for that OCO boost to get us up there. We will fully execute that 83%. And then we're focusing on recruiting the critical talent that we need and, of course, retaining the critical skills. So it's all about recruiting, retention, and the readiness, so thank you for the money. Our concern is really the next 2 years. We look at it as 2 years of money, and then we're going to do everything we can, full throttle, as our secretary says, to get after the readiness now, because in 2 years we're not sure what it's going to look like. So we're giving it everything we can right now. So thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your service. We know what a essential part of the team you all are, and we want to thank you for your service over the last couple of decades. We know how much strain has been put on you and sequestration, and we apologize for that. General Miller is my favorite panelist because you are from Ohio. I have a couple questions, and I want to first say thank you for being so engaged with the Air Base in Youngstown, Ohio, and our mission there, the aerial spray mission that is essential for the reserve. Can you talk to us a little bit about the C-1? Of course, I'm going to ask about the C-130Js, and if you can give us a little bit of your analysis on where we are and kind of where we need to be, and maybe what the demands are.
Yes, when you look at the overall Air Force tactical airlift numbers, 300 is what we need. And the H's, the current structure that we have is 300. We're programmed to keep 300. And the Air Force right now, we do not have J models built into the program to actually recapitalize the H's. We've put money into increment 1 and 2, AMP 1 and 2, and we're progressing very, very well with that. AMP 1 is actually completely funded. AMP 2 is actually funded in the FIDEP also. So we are getting after all the AMP 1 adjustments that need to be completed by 2020, and then by 2028, all the AMP 2 will be done. So the H's will be fully ready to fly, fully capable of flying anywhere in the world to do their mission.
Two quick questions, one for you, General Miller, and one for Mr. Luckey, on retention. I'm worried about the pilot retention issue, and I'm worried about the cyber talent retention and recruitment that we need. So, General Miller, if you could go first and just talk a little bit about the challenges you may be having, and with a very competitive commercial pilot industry competing with the men and women we're trying to go after.
For the Air Force Reserve, our pilot manning on the part-time force, which is the majority of airline pilots, I mean, that part-time force, I'd say 98% of them fly in the airlines. We are manned at 96.5%. So I have the pilots on the part-time force to go do the mission if we're called. It's the full-time force that we're stressed. We were manned at 68%. I've brought that manning up to 72% on the full-time side. So to get after the full-time deficit that we have, the gap, I'm looking at putting a different full-time status in many of our mission sets, and that's called Active Guard and Reserve. So that AGR status is different than the Air Reserve Technician status because it allows you SARA return rights. So an airline pilot can go fly with the airlines for a couple of years, come to us for a couple of years, and then return back to the airline. So there's a a great opportunity for them to just continue full-time in both and just share time over a period of a couple years. So I'm making that adjustment in the full-time support. I think that'll bring the full-time support pilot numbers up into the low 80s, mid 80s, potentially on the full-time side.
Great, thank you. General Lucky.
Congressman, very quickly, thanks for the question. First of all, from a pilot perspective, I'm at 94%, which is really right at the Army average. I'm frankly not concerned about that. On the cyber thing, I'll turn it a little. I actually think that the Army Reserve presents a tremendous opportunity, and I think I talked about this last year a little bit. We're actually moving force structure to capture talent, both from the sections perspective into the force, but also to retain those soldiers coming off of active duty, specifically as you touched upon, who are going to find much more financial incentive to go into the private sector and continue to do this work, and great opportunity for them to continue to partner with the Army and the Army Reserve. So we're moving force structure to different, I call it digital key terrain in America, where we're going to be able to capture and retain that talent, keep it as part of the force on a part-time basis, and it's bearing fruit already.
Great.
But,
Yield back.
Congressman, if I could just add one other
Sure.
point, if I may, Mr. Chairman, is we know that pilots are the happiest when they have flying hours and platforms to fly in. The Navy Reserve is very focused on maintaining a viable recapitalization to allow that, so we can capture that return on investment if an active pilot leaves to the reserve, somewhere $8 to $9 million at the 8-year point. So we're very focused, viable platforms, recapitalized, to give them an opportunity to continue to serve.
Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the whole panel. A big thank you to each of you and your families for your great service to our country. We appreciate each of you, so thank you for being here this morning. General Lucky, clearly as a nation, I know this has been touched on a little bit, we've endured major national disasters since you were here last year. Hurricanes have ravaged Texas, Louisiana, Florida, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and parts of even Alabama. So in the wake of Katrina, Congress took action to provide immediate response authority to reserve forces. And so I wanted to see if you would be willing to comment on those authorities, and do we have it right in terms of providing the reserve with the necessary authorities to provide domestic disaster response on a timely basis?
So Congresswoman, first of all, thanks for the question. I got my mic on now, so I apologize for that. Absolutely. This has been, I think it's been a game changer. And I'll just, one very quick vignette, and I don't want to take all your time on this, but as Harvey gathered energy in the Gulf, I saw it literally, my wife Julie saw it on the iPad. She commented, we were driving across the country, gone out to check on my brother who had been injured, and I called the TAG of Texas to ask them what they needed, and the TAG told me they needed hoist-capable aircraft, and I have 38 of them in the Army Reserve. So based on that conversation, I was able to pre-position aircraft in the Fort Worth area out of the sort of the path of the predicted path of the storm, but proximate enough to the disaster site to immediately mass effects on that target area. So we moved aircraft as an emergency deployment readiness operation. We moved hoist aircraft from Colorado. We moved them from Olathe, Kansas, CH-47s. We're able to move those capabilities, have them proximate, and immediately be delivering effects, both in terms of rescuing folks, moving critical medical supplies, all kinds of commodities around that space. Similar scenarios, although not so much aviation intensive, in both Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands and Florida and Louisiana, as you touched upon. It's a tremendous opportunity, frankly, for our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines to be able to respond where they live and or move to support people in other places in the United States. So I think it's a game changer in terms of our ability to message and achieve effects immediately. So I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. And for the panel, and I don't have a whole lot of time left, but for the panel, given now that we have an operational reserve, I want to keep a close eye on the operations tempo for our reserve forces. So can you please comment on your assessment of the mission requirements for your service versus the size of our forces? Do we need a bigger reserve? And what is your philosophy on the individual ready reserve? Are we providing incentives and professional opportunities for people to stay? And that's for whoever wants to jump in.
So I'll start first here at this end. The operational reserve that we have today is, as you say, deeply in the fight all over the world. On a strategic, so the reserve is really a strategic force that we've that we've leveraged for the last 25 years as an operational force. The Reserve Forces Policy Board has done great strides in putting the right authorities in place, building the definition of an operational reserve, and lines of effort that go to identifying what an operational reserve is. The piece that I think that I need, that we have yet to complete, is a little bit of full-time on top of the strategic base that we have, because we're dipping in every day to that strategic base and making demands on their time, which is great, which is what we do. But after 25 years, our folks are getting stressed. So I'm manned at 17 to 25% full-time. I need a little bit more. The Guard is roughly 32%, so I'm going to, across my Air Force Reserve, I'm putting enablers in the support and the operations piece to get after that full-time support. Otherwise, we're in a good position.
Ma'am, if I could weigh in here for just 1 minute. We are right-sized in the Marine Corps Reserve. The number one question that I get from my reserves, when do we get to go to the fight, whatever that fight is? So they're motivated and they're ready to be engaged in operations.
Thank you. Ms. Capter.
Thank you all very much for being here today. I wanted to begin with General Miller. During the last round of F-35 fielding, the state of Ohio narrowly missed the F-35 cut. Is the Air Force intending to begin another round of F-35 fielding to the reserves, and if so, when will that occur?
Currently, we have a preferred alternative of Fort Worth. And then our alternative bases, if Fort Worth is not selected, would be either DM, Homestead, or Whiteman. So our 4 bases are firmly in the plan for the F-35. And 19, the Chief and Secretary will make the decision on if Fort Worth is that preferred alternative, if that is the base that we put them.
Right. I just wanted to say across the spectrum this morning, I've read all of your testimony, and I believe General McMillan has the most complete section dealing with health services and behavioral health. So I wanted to ask you, representing some reserve components myself, the 983rd Army was just deployed to the Middle East. How does your suicide rate compare to the military average, up or down, especially over the last year?
So let me jump on that first, if I may, Congresswoman. So the suicide rate in the Army Reserve, frankly, has just recently ticked up above the Army average. And I will tell you, first of all, I can't prove this, but I will tell you one of my concerns is that the financial aspect of stress on families is in many cases particularly acute for those families that where soldiers have had multiple deployments, may have stressors with their employers, and have come back from deployments and either be unemployed or underemployed. So we're targeting our private-public partnership program to ensure that those soldiers who are identified at risk financially get additional support in finding jobs. I can't prove that there's a nexus between financial stressors and self-destructive behavior, but I'm targeting that population specifically to get after the challenge.
One interesting fact I learned this morning, if you go to many of our large bases, even in this country, and I'm not talking about reserve components, but you'll see predatory lenders all wrapped around the edges of the bases, and this financial issue is really a very critical one that I think we would welcome your recommendations based on what you know. Could I ask General McMillan, what about the Marine Reserve?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. Last year, we had 12 suicides in the Marine Corps Reserves. This year, we're at 5. So not quite at 50%, but trending in that direction. The vast majority of our suicides occur in a non-drilling status, in between drill weekends when we don't have eyes on them, when the Marine reservist is out in the community with their families and working in their civilian jobs. We do an in-depth analysis after each suicide, and we have come to the conclusion that each one of those suicides touches one of 3 areas. Number 1, financial problems in the civilian sector. Number 2, relationship problems. And number 3, legal problems. Some of those all together, some of those by themselves, but each one ties into that. So when we see them, on our drill weekends, we have what we call kneecap to kneecap, eyeball to eyeball leadership and mentoring sessions with them. And also we stay in touch with them in between their drills to see how they're doing. We're exercising that small unit leadership to the nth degree to try to keep them on the straight and level, so to speak, ma'am.
Well, I appreciate your careful monitoring of who they are, and I would just suggest if it could help us help you. In going down to Special Forces with the chair a few months ago, we saw where Special Forces had embedded behavioral specialists in each unit, and that had brought their suicide rate down to the military average. Reservists are scattered all over the place. They come home often to no base. Maybe they report into a headquarters, but then they're off somewhere. Admiral McCullum, you talk about mobile technologies within the Naval Reserve being available for different things. I've really been wondering about mobile technologies where we could take the best medicine we have, where they could take apps, or we would connect them so they wouldn't be so far away from care. I've actually been present at a reserve base where units come home, and I've seen soldiers that are in need of care immediately. It isn't available, so it's kind of messy when it gets back to the local level. I would appreciate your summary for us, or meeting with those of us who care about this, how we can better bring that care to them, and whether we need to fund additional behavioral specialists within the reserve or pay for their medical education, but it's a need across the military. And I even want to take the technologies, if we have them, to Ukraine, because I see what's happening at the front there with soldiers there. And I don't think we've got this thing pinned down completely, and we could do much better, but you've got elements of the solution within your testimonies today and from your own personal knowledge. So, Madam Chair, I wanted to highlight this arena of behavioral health. In 5 minutes, you can't even touch the surface. But is there any way that you could summarize what you know and report back to us on ways in which we could better help you help the soldier?
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Visklowski.
Yes, hey, Madam Chair. I just want to talk for a few minutes about a societal problem that at this late date remains breathtaking, I think, to all of us. It's also evident in the military, but I think the military has a special responsibility, and that's sexual assault in a hostile work environment. We're all familiar with these statistics, particularly the one that reporting has increased 240%, according to a fiscal year 16 report since 2004, which would indicate potentially that people are more comfortable coming forward. The question I'd have for each of you, though, is with more people coming forward, I regret they have to, I'm very worried about retaliation. I've talked to people about forms of retaliation, and sometimes it's very ham-handed, and sometimes it's very subtle. So how do each of you and your commands work down to that level that, listen, this just is not to be tolerated, and if somebody comes forth, they should not be the ones who are going to be punished here?
So, Ranking Member, if I may take that on initially, just two thoughts. One, from a senior leadership perspective, obviously it starts with me. So, just be assured that this is on multiple occasions. I have made it very clear, and I'm on Facebook, although I'm not so sure I should be on Facebook anymore.
We don't want to.
Yeah. But I'm on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter, and I'm on all these different social media, and there are platforms that I use to try to make sure that this message. So, in addition to the website for the Army Reserve, constantly messaging. I think fairly stridently, frankly, my position, our position, not in our squad, not in this team, not in America's Army Reserve. I will tell you, from an assessment perspective, I watch this pretty carefully. This is the month for awareness, both as to sexual assault and sexual harassment. We just recently finished another climate survey for both my headquarters at Fort Bragg for the Army Reserve Command, and also for the Office of the Chief of the Army Reserve here at Fort Belvoir and in the Pentagon. I'm not, and I don't want to come across as overconfident about this. but I will tell you statistically, of the things that I'm concerned about in terms of inappropriate behavior, I would say the one that I keep a close eye on is nothing that's as explicit or as obvious as actual out-and-out assault or demeaning behavior. It's sort of more inappropriate language that sort of opens up the aperture for other sort of more, I won't say predatory, but just more inappropriate behavior. Somebody thinks it's okay to do this, so now it's okay to do that. So I'm very cognizant of that, and I think we're attacking it fairly aggressively. As to your reprisal concern, I'm always here to learn and come up and get better techniques, and I get them from my colleagues all the time. I'll just tell you the most important thing I think I can do as a senior leader of the Army Reserve is message every day in every way that anybody who has anything that concerns them needs to bring this up to somebody that they trust in the chain of command, or not in the chain of command, but a sexual assault, sexual harassment advisor.
In the Navy Reserve, similar to General Lucky's comment, every morning I review any report where we have knowledge that a sexual assault has occurred. And in those discussions and in those reports, it's important for me to know, number one, the victim's situation. Do they have an advocate assigned?
I just want to, and I understand on assault, but just that is the general said, just language, the hostile, but I'm worried about retaliation. What happens after somebody reports, and are you worried about somebody, and again, sometimes it can be very subtle. So it's the retaliation. I know we've got to go.
Yeah. It's important that we know that, so retaliation itself is what mechanism does the victim have, what tools to be protected against any indication of retaliation. They have an advocate that's assigned. I look by name who their advocate is. And then in that context, is it how restrictive? It's the victim's choice. Is it unrestricted? It's the victim's choice. And then with that awareness and with those dialogue, we can find out quickly if there's a profile of retaliatory, and we act on it, including if they request to be moved to another command.
Okay, so somebody would be assigned to them to be support and help.
That is correct.
Sir, in the Marine Corps, it starts with the Commandant, and we all get underneath the Commandant and provide, we're tasked to provide superb leadership and morale in all of our units. If we're not doing that, then we're not doing our job. So everybody that's underneath me, I task them, their number one priority is to provide superb leadership and ensure all of our units have great morale. And if they can't provide that, then I hold them accountable as the Commandant holds me accountable to provide that. We want to ensure that we have the trust and confidence of our nation's most precious assets, which I mentioned in my verbal testimony, that we're charged with taking care of. Now, tied in with that, we have found out through command climate surveys how our units are doing, and across the board, I think we're doing very well. It shows that they have trust and confidence in their leadership, and tie that into sexual harassment and sexual assaults. Our reporting is up, and that's a good thing, and we see that as having trust in the leadership to investigate all of those claims and then hold people accountable, and we are going to do that for you. I'm doing it for the Commandant, and I'm sure he will, when he comes in to testify, he'll tell you he's doing the same thing for the Marine Corps.
Is there someone that is, if you would, assigned to that person who comes forward?
Yes, sir. They get a direct assignment to take care of their issue. Yes, sir.
Yeah, very similar to the Marine Corps. It's about trust. And the victim needs to understand that we are there to support them, take care of them. If there's a issue or a perceived issue of retaliation, either one is important. And we need to jump on it and take care of it and hold the member accountable for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Capter.
Yes, Madam Chair, I just wanted to place a figure on the record, though this is a reserve panel, the prior panel on the Guard. Last year in the Guard, 132 soldiers committed suicide. The vast majority were Army Guard. So I would hope we would have the same figures, and that, by the way, is an increase.
Thank
Very
you.
important issue. Thank you.
Thank you. We've run out of time, and so I have a ask of you, not a question me to answer today, but, you know, we've expressed some concern. There's such admiration for our reservists and our Guard, and that is in every city that we're in and across the nation, and to make sure that they're cared for and that they have the support they need. But the other thing, we've heard about some employers who won't hire members of the Guard or Reserves because of the possibility of missed work due to their deployment. And as I said early in the last panel, it has to be a respect and a contribution from employers and the employees who want to work and also serve in the Reserve or Guard. And so if there's something else that needs to be done to mitigate this, to make sure they're not discriminated in the workforce, would you please let us know that? And is there anything else the Congress needs to do to help support our Guard and Reserves in their quest? It's the work they're doing is keeping us safe, and it's very important. So if you'd get back with us, we'd really appreciate that very much. That concludes today's hearing. The subcommittee stands adjourned.